Poimen Ministries Podcast Network. Strength for today's pastor. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Strength for Today's Pastor, a resource designed to strengthen you, the senior or lead pastor of your church. Here's your host, Bill Holdridge. Bill is the director of Poimen Ministries, which is a team of former longtime senior pastors who are available to strengthen pastors, to strengthen churches.
Welcome to today's episode of Strength for Today's Pastor. My name is Bill Holdridge. I'm the host of the program, and this program is sponsored by Poimen Ministries. And today's broadcast, we're going to be talking about the ongoing need of pastors to prepare for their eventual retirement, or perhaps the Lord takes them home to be with the Lord. Are they ready for that time? And with me is Pastor Gillett Doggett. Gillett has been a part of our Poimen Ministries team from the beginning since 2008, and he has the wonderful distinction of being the youngest and oldest of us, youngest in heart and oldest of us chronologically, probably, on our whole team. Gillett is now in the ripe old age of 85 years old. But he's kind of like Caleb, he's got that strength like he has had for many, many years. Gillett was the founding pastor of Calvary Chapel, Rialto, California. He pastored there for about 12 years and then moved up to North Fork near the Sierras, near the Yosemite area. And he pastored Calvary Chapel of the Sierra for 17 years and has been part of our team since 2008. So, Gillett, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We're so excited to talk about this because it is a huge subject and something that I think a lot of pastors, especially those in our tribe, have not really paid the kind of attention to that they could or should. Wouldn't you agree?
Unfortunately, that's very true, yeah.
So what brought you into this heart? I mean, you really have a heart for this area of ministry, and you really have a heart for pastors in this particular need to prepare for either retirement or going home to be with the Lord and preparing and leaving something for their family. What gave you such a burden for this kind of thing?
Well, it started when one day when I was reading 1 Timothy 5:8, where it says, quote, "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." And, like a lot of pastors, we go through teaching certain passages and applying it to someone else, not always taught that message with an emphasis on deadbeat dads. But for me, it was like a wake-up call to them. And but it seemed like the Holy Spirit began to speak to me on that day, saying, "No, this is for you." And so I certainly didn't want to be in the eyes of the Lord worse than an unbeliever. And so I began thinking about, what do I need to do? And years later, after determining what I needed to do, I began to have a passion for other pastors that were not prepared for leaving a legacy for their spouse, their children, in case the Lord should take them home.
So that really is the genesis of this passion within you, and you and your work with Poimen Ministries have had more one-on-one contact with lots more pastors since 2008. And what have you seen? Have you seen that tendency, like we've been talking about, to not really pay attention to this?
That's true, too, because, as you said, I'm meeting with a lot of pastors at pastors' conferences and visiting pastors in their churches. It seems that in so many cases, they're just not prepared for that time of retirement or that time of going home to be with the Lord to provide for their household. And I wouldn't want to go as far as Paul does in Timothy, saying they're worse than an unbeliever, but unfortunately, they're not prepared. And you know as well, Bill, that we know of pastors that have gone home to be with the Lord, and sometimes unexpectedly young, and just have not prepared their widows for that unfortunate event.
That is unfortunate. And why do you think that is? I mean, within our tribe anyway, Gillett, why do you think a lot of pastors, a lot of us have been relatively unprepared? What are some of the factors involved with that, do you think?
Well, it's probably kind of like me in my early years, was that I was thinking the Lord's going to take care of us, And that was my excuse for not providing for my family. And I'm assuming that a lot of the times when guys don't make that preparation, then it's because just having it in the back of their mind, God will take care of it, but recognizing that God provides us with opportunities to take care of it along with Him.
Yeah, and a lot of churches don't have foresight on their board of directors or elder team to really make sure that this is happening with their pastor, that he's really being adequately gearing up for his retirement days or his time when he's not able to function as a pastor or when the Lord takes him home. We've also seen a lot of pastors that have opted out of Social Security within our tribe, and what that has done, of course, is meant that they don't really have any real retirement income, especially if they didn't do anything on the board level. You know, that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And once again, it's just the idea that the board, and that's where the board needs to be educated in this as well as the pastor and his pastor's wife, is that they need to be educated that we need to take care of our pastor. We need to take care of his family in case something like this where he becomes incapacitated or he dies or whatever the matter may be, the family is going to be taken care of. So the board needs to be educated as well as the pastor and his wife.
Right. So in that education process and in that desire to help pastors, you know, when we're speaking to a pastor that perhaps has opted out of Social Security and maybe the church board didn't do anything and maybe the pastor's living month to month and maybe it's a moderate-sized church, maybe it's a smaller church, that pastor, when he faces these kinds of questions, could feel overwhelmed, like it's too late. I don't know what's going to happen. So is there any hope or is there any help for even a person in that extreme of a situation?
Well, I encourage the pastors that are listening to this to visit the pastor's legacy plan as a first step in creating the legacy that they desire and assure them they're providing as the Lord expects them to. There are a lot of aspects to that plan, of the legacy plan.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that. So let's just open up that subject then. We've introduced the problem. Pastors need to be prepared for retirement, going home to be with the Lord, or being incapacitated. So what is the plan? What are some of the options? And you mentioned a good way to get started on the whole process. Go to the pastorslegacyplan.com, which is not only a website, but it is an actual plan for pastors to develop their own legacy. Let's talk about some of those resources.
Well, you know, Larry Scroggins, part of the team, has a great explanation. I'll just tag team with him on some of the points that he made. Larry quotes Proverbs 22:3, where he says, "A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences." And Larry goes on to say, so the question to pastors and churches is your church taking the appropriate precautions to assure a clear transition when a pastor passes away? Often the answer to this question is no. But that's a question that the pastor and the board need to address, and they need to cover it in prayer about what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And prayer needs to be a priority as the church's board and their pastor as they begin to kind of think through all the aspects of a succession plan when a pastor goes home to be with the Lord.
So a pastor listening to this and hearing this is thinking, you know, I see the need, and I don't want to be the guy of Proverbs 22:3. I want to be a good provider for my family in the future. I need to do all these things, but I don't know if my board can buy into this, and I don't even know if we have the resources. I'm suspecting, Gillett, that this podcast will be a helpful tool for pastors. They can take this podcast and say, guys, would you do me a favor? Would you listen to this podcast? Would you join me in prayer about these things? And then maybe we can come up with a plan.
That's wise counsel, and hopefully the pastors will have the courage to do that, present it to their board, because obviously, as you said, there's going to be some smaller churches that just haven't considered it because they feel like their finances can't provide for it. But a lot of times the plan isn't created because our church community doesn't have the proper professional guidance to address those kind of things, the life insurance that the pastor needs and other kinds of areas that they need to be considering. So I think if they listen to this, go to the pastorslegacyplan.com and see all the options, they'll get a better understanding of what they can do as the pastor, as the wife, as the board to accomplish what they feel like that they hadn't even considered before.
Okay, so you've mentioned the Pastor's Legacy Plan, and I know the genesis of that plan and how it came into being. Maybe you could explain it a little bit, what the Pastor's Legacy Plan is all about.
Well, briefly, there's a lot of, as I said before, there's a lot of aspects to it, but basically it's a ministry that informs and educates pastors, their wives, as well as the church boards in why and how to care for the pastor's widow if he should be taken home to be with the Lord. And that not only includes financially, but spiritually, emotionally, and other means of support as well. So briefly, that's what it's all about. But like I say, there's a lot more to it than just that. There's a lot of aspects that need to be covered.
Well, one of the key things that you said was when you used the word ministry. It is indeed a ministry, even though the Pastor's Legacy Plan was crafted by Doug Eagle and William Wright, who are professionals in the field. They really have a heart for pastors, and it is a ministry to them.
Amen.
And so they put this together for that reason, in order to be able to really help pastors and their boards in this area. And they're getting the best professional advice that one can get by going on the website. So describe what going on the website looks like. What does it feel like for the pastor before they've had a chance to log in?
Well, there's just different areas of looking at what responsibilities the church board has and how they can fulfill those responsibilities. There's a financial aspect of the plan. There's also the spiritual and emotional aspect of the plan. So the board, the pastor, can look at those things and determine what is it will work for us. Because everything is not going to be fitting for everyone. Every church has a different situation, circumstances that they need to deal with. So one fit is not for everyone. And they can go through and make a determination of what is going to fit for us, no matter what our size, no matter what our financial circumstances are.
Right. So when they go to the website, one of the things they can do is they can engage in a number of questions that will help the pastor and the board assess what the actual situation of that pastor and his family is and the type of help that they might pursue moving forward.
Yep. And they can feel comfortable with doing it. They don't have to feel any pressure just because professionals put this together. Like you said, they have a heart, a passion for helping pastors. And so there's no pressure into doing one thing when there's several options that they have to cover.
Yeah, and I think that's something to really emphasize. You know, when you go online for something and we're interested in maybe an insurance product or auto insurance or a mortgage quote or something like that, we can almost guarantee we're going to be barraged by emails and by phone calls and third-party vendors that want to get in on the action, and it just makes us hesitate to want to even fill out anything. But that's not at all what this is about, right? They can go on the site, they can fill out the information, and it's up to the pastor and his board to pursue further information and contact with any given professional in the field that they want to use. They don't have to use the professionals behind the Pastor's Legacy Plan. They can use professionals that they have already in their own world.
That's right. You know, regarding the financial aspect of the plan, it's so important that the board establish the priority of this issue with the overall budget of the church. And, think about it. You got salaries, you got missions, you got in-house ministries, and the list just goes on and on and on. Does the church provide as a part of the pastor's salary? Will the church cover burial expenses? What about mortgages? What kind of income is a widow going to have? As we mentioned earlier about 1 Timothy 5:8, where we're warned if we're not providing for the household is worse than an unbeliever. Well, just what does that provide mean? I can't fall back on the idea that I'm providing for the needs right now. I mean, what about the future? How's it going to make ends meet if I'm suddenly gone? So that's what the pastor's legacy plan is all about, is to help work through those kind of questions.
I remember when we were first approached by Doug Eagle concerning any interest in partnering in this area because he had such a heart for pastors. Can you talk a little bit about how we got involved with this and why we believe that this is a great initial tool to use to really become informed and maybe even take some steps in the direction of doing something about it?
Well, I don't remember all the details, fine details of it, but I just recall at a pastor's conference meeting Doug and getting on the subject of my concern about widows and seeing so many widows left hanging after the pastor has died. And Doug had the same interest. And so as we began to discuss it, he began working on this plan. The term pastor's legacy plan came into existence probably 2 or 3 years later than that. But it took quite a bit of work, quite a bit of effort on their part, putting the whole thing together to make it accessible to any and all pastors to know that they can use it without feeling pressure from the experts in those areas. Maybe you remember, Bill, I can't remember exactly how many years it took. I just remember at one of the pastors' conferences having a meeting with pastors and explaining that, with Doug Eagle, explaining that we have this plan in motion, not calling it a legacy plan yet, but just a plan, and having one pastor come to me later and say, yeah, I've heard this stuff before, it's never going to work. And now it's there, it's ready for pastors to find comfort in and find help in the questions they might have.
When someone goes to the website, pastorslegacyplan.com, they're going to see a video where my face is on the screen and I'm saying some things in recommendation of pursuit of the plan. And also they're going to see videos by you, Gillett, and that's just because you and I were the guys from Poimen Ministries that were initially involved with Doug and his team. But they're the ones that have done all the legwork. They're the professionals. And they're just really trying to help pastors. That's really their goal. So their passion was really similar to our passion. Our vision, Poimen Ministries, is to strengthen pastors, to strengthen churches. And their vision is to help pastors in their preparation for the future to strengthen the pastor and his family. So it really is very parallel in our purposes, I think, don't you?
Yes, I do. Continuing on with another thought, too. We're talking about the financial end of it quite a bit, but I kind of want to address this idea about the spiritual and emotional support that we talked about earlier. So let's say the pastor and the board is taking care of the financial support. Let's say they sit down, they come to agreement about. But Larry Scroggin makes another good point about that spiritual and emotional support. Let me quote what he said. Spiritual and emotional support for the pastor's widow and children is necessary, and it should be expected, even given the pain and grief one endures when losing a loved one. So, pastors that are listening to this, when it comes to the pastor's widow, there needs to be some kind of a clear plan in place for her as well. So, it all depends on her role within the ministry. Let's say she is in a leadership role. How is that going to be handled when the new pastor's wife comes in? These things need to be addressed. The widow should never be pushed inside in some kind of arbitrary position. And so along with the present pastor that comes in to cover and his wife, there needs to be a discussion with the board to document what happens now. So when that happens, so there's no kind of unspoken assumptions during some kind of a transitional period. And I don't think a lot of churches have ever even thought about those kind of circumstances that they need to deal with as a board.
Well said, Gillett. And that is an issue that has come up as we've gone into situations that require a church transition. The pastor has died, and unfortunately, within Calvary Chapels, we've had a number of pastoral deaths, and we've often been called to come in and help that church in their transition to their next pastor. And the subject of how to help the widow and the church with the widow, has come up, and we've been involved with that. And so I would say to church boards, if you're listening to this, or to pastors as you listen to this, that Poimen Ministries is available to help with consultation and just assistance in helping you formulate a plan, or even if your pastor suddenly goes home to be with the Lord, to do it after the fact and help you with your relationship with the pastor's widow, because it is important and it affects not only the pastor and his legacy within his family, but it affects the whole church body as well.
As you say, I would counsel pastors to talk about this with their wife, and the two of them meet with the board to create some kind of a clear transitional process, something that's going to help the wife to grieve, but to continue serving in ministry, and not having that feeling like she's in competition with someone new. All these things need to be discussed. All it needs to be something that's clearly designated what's going to take place, rather than just assume that everything is going to work out okay.
So our word of encouragement to you pastors that are listening to this is, number one, allow this subject to come into your heart and allow it to get into the radar of your mind. And after you do that, then begin to pray about it and begin to communicate with your spouse about this, and then find ways to communicate with your leadership team about this. And then you can take the next step any point in time along the road, and you can go to the pastorslegacyplan.com. You could reach out to Poimen Ministries for help in whatever way we can assist you, but do something. Inactivity and doing nothing will not get the job done, and you'll find yourself way, way behind if situations do come up that are going to require action on your part. So I just want to encourage you guys, it's okay. This isn't carnal to pursue these kinds of things. This isn't negating the fact that Jesus could come back at any moment. This is actually good stewardship. I remember Martin Luther having been quoted. Somebody asked him, what would you do if you knew Jesus was going to come back tomorrow? And he said, I would go plant an apple tree today. And I think that, that speaks volumes. We have to occupy until Jesus comes and be as ready as we can in our family and in our church. And what a wonderful thing. If you go home to be with the Lord, you're not going to be thinking about the troubles that are on the earth anymore. But if you could think about it, wouldn't it be great to have the memory that your wife has been taken care of and you've got a church body that's going to love them and help them transition into their next phase of life? Any final words, Pastor Gillett?
I would agree with everything as you said, and if a pastor on the board feels it's necessary for another set of ears and eyes to help monitor those discussions, they can call or email you, Bill, to line up one of our team members to meet with them. And they can also visit the pastorslegacyplan.com to learn how they can help you and the church to create the right plan. And it would be a plan that's guided by your beliefs, your principles, to assure the legacy that you desire for you and your family.
That's great counsel, Gillett. And I think, anybody listening to this, pastors, I would recommend that you get in touch with Pastor Gillett. So if you call me, I'll call him, because he's a great guy to talk with about this. He has such a heart and a passion for it. Thank you, Gillett, for joining us on today's Strength for Today's Pastor. We're just grateful that you've been able to be with us, and we thank God for the vision of taking care of pastors, their families, churches, and their widows.
Amen.
Amen. God bless you for listening. Thanks for joining us on today's edition of Strength for Today's Pastor.
Strength for Today's Pastor is sponsored by Poimen Ministries. You can find us at poimenministries.com. That's spelled Poimen Ministries.com. If something in today's program prompts a question or desire to connect with us, or if you have a comment or a topic idea for a future episode, just shoot us an email at strongerpastors@gmail.com. That's strongerpastors@gmail.com. Until we meet again, may you continue to be a strengthened pastor.